Yes, apologies for that.
I don't know about the other room. We had a beautiful conversation. It was so aligned. So I don't know what anyone of you wants to share before we have a quick break and then go into our inquiring session when we'll start working on the Miros. But if there was something that spoke to you from that conversation, please do share it with everyone else.
Maybe I'll share a little bit of what we spoke, and please, guys, just come in, to complement. But it was so interesting because we all came from different points of view, but kind of integrating in a sense that we understand the challenges of the very real commercial market and how sometimes, in the academic world or coming on the business world or digital world is, maybe sometimes people, they understand. Sometimes they might be understanding in a very superficial way, but they understand the issues, but they just don't find a way to kind of verbalize or be able to talk about it because it just doesn't feel like part of the way that the system is, and it feels so challenging that it's like, okay, I'm just going to go as business as usual because it's complicated. But in a sense, we also see that change and more people coming in, and there is that understanding. So it kind of feels like it's about like how to put words and be able to express this, but also empathize with people in a way that like the way as we go flowing with emotions. And sometimes we're going to have more energy, sometimes not. And so how do we understand that and bring that into the understanding and the framework of how we're approaching that this challenge? I guess that's a little bit, but guys, please add more.
I guess just on a more of like a raw level, I think in shared experience and shared challenge, kind of more of like an emotional side that people feel and think and probably have the same like or similar thoughts.
Liv, just to say, I think the
Oh,
mic's
no.
muffling again. Sorry.
All I was saying is that kind of like the shared, on like an emotional level, it seemed that we were all kind of had a lot of the same kind of shared emotions of fears and also maybe exciting days and worries and stuff.
One thing I'll add from our group as well is that what I heard, and it might be confirmation bias, because sometimes you look for connections on the things that seem important to you in the moment. But one thing that I felt a connection with is that we're all doing work trying to help people in the business world and beyond to imagine an economy that doesn't quite exist yet. It exists you see snippets of it, but it doesn't. It's not yet tangible. It's not necessarily even proven, nor is it, completely developed in a way where you can show people, look, here it is. This is what we're going to do. This is what it's going to look like. This is what your business will look like. There is a leap of faith that we're encouraging people to take that is unavoidable, has to happen, but still there's a reluctance, and part of that reluctance is also the reality that they've got a foot at least in the reality of the current commercial context, in the difficulty of surviving, often cutthroat and difficult markets, and there's there's an emotional discomfort in that. There's an emotional discomfort in going, but I've got to do this, but I have to become this, and there are ways out of that. There's ways to escape it by going, we'll just focus on the bits where actually the business case is really strong, and we therefore don't have to deal with the contradictions or the trade-offs or the difficult bits or other ways of escaping it. But there's yeah, I understand that temptation to want to avoid the discomfort of that contradictory force pulling you in the new economy while living and trying to make it work in the current economy. And I think I heard a version of that sort of as a part of the work of a lot of us.
Yeah, that just kind of sparked something for me. I was reading just before this a paper that talked about deontological ethics and other ethical frameworks in the context of social value. And I think there's something about like wanting to do the right thing and to be a person with integrity who's doing the thing that you're meant to do. And then if you're in these two different frameworks of what the right thing to do is, then it's not possible. And there's always a sense of like, oh, but I was acting with integrity and being a good person according to this one framework, and now I'm being punished in the other framework because I didn't do that thing, and it's not fair. Or, yeah, like there's no way to kind of be able to succeed on both things simultaneously. Maybe maybe there is, I don't know, but I feel like it's hard.
Your point there's sort of flagged something for me, because I face that problem so often. It's like there's got to be a right answer. There's got to be a right answer, and if I don't get it right, I'm going to screw something up. And that's right, part of me, and how I was growing up and stuff like that. Just saying like, hate getting things wrong, being a pure perfectionist. And I think that a lot of the unlearning for me is about that. And I think this idea of the right or wrong, I sort of try and move away from, or trying to move away from that binary as much as possible, and talk about things being better. And it was just one very loose thought. I was like, there's probably no fixed right way of doing things, but there's probably definite wrong ways of doing things. And I think in that respect, sort of like identifying where there's like the here be dragons a wrong thing, but there are multiple better possibilities, but there isn't some sort of like fixed future state that we're all sort of trying to scrabble around and find. There's going to be a very messy, but hopefully more coherent way of doing things, which avoids some of the worst extractive practices that are being modeled now. So yeah, your point helped me sort of guide to some epiphany there. I don't know if I can explain it articulately right now, but it helped. Thank you.
I think that this contradiction that you are talking about, Kyle, and that we usually and so often feel is part of this story of separation that we've been experiencing the last 2,000 years. I don't know, or perhaps more. Right or wrong, left hemisphere and right hemisphere of your brain, women characteristics and men characteristics, human on one side and nature on the other. So this is a contradiction and a story of separation. We are trying to heal this story of separation in our work, and it's really tough, and it's a really hard work to do, because we've been listening to this story. We are a storytelling species, so we've been listening to this so many years. And there is a wonderful framework that is the law of three that we use very often to try to explain and try to understand how to find a way out of this contradiction. When you have a triad, when you have an activating force, a constraining force, and try to find this reconciling force up to try to break this contradiction. Jenny Anderson works a lot with this law of three, and it's really interesting and very useful to apply or to work with these kind of frameworks with companies or with organizations to bring light to this right or wrong universe that we are so used to working.
as we're just edging into talking about themes, you know, that theory of three there, starting to get into the things we might talk about in the inquiring session. So I'm sensing that it might be time to throw up the Miro and start to think about that. Has anyone got any final reflections that you'd like to share from the listening circles?
I'm going to be brave. I wasn't part of the room, unfortunately. My tech let me down, so I got kicked out. But I'm going to just share some observations I've had recently working with some small businesses that have been trying to go through things like B Lab certification, just trying to do the right thing in the early stages of starting up and growing their businesses, because they're aware that this is the future of doing business, trying to be more responsible to the environment and society. And I'm on this journey myself, trying to understand and gather tools along the way, but it seems to be a very confused space for a small business to navigate if they have the intention to do good businesses. I'm just going to use that generally, good business. And I think also there's an issue around just generally change, just that word change, that we all need to change, and it's almost like cultural change, but on a global kind of perspective. And that journey of changing, the kind of the fear and the anxiety, but you need to change towards something that you can start to understand and digest and that makes sense. And because it's still quite unformed, based on the mindsets we already have from our upbringing and the viewpoints we have of the world, it's very difficult to imagine something so completely different, because we can't project forward our experiences into that new space and create that new understanding of this is how business could be. I don't know if that makes sense. It kind of makes sense to me, but I hope you can appreciate what I'm saying. It's a journey, but without the destination formed and the certainty of arriving there, it's very difficult for small businesses who are keen to change to go on that journey. And also the plethora of tools and different organizations now trying to compete in that space is very confusing, and it's expensive.
We're definitely into Miro board territory now, because you know, dealing with that confusing landscape could very well be a theme to work with. So I'll pop the link in the chat. Inevitably, Miro never works quite as well as I hope it would, but hey, I am a bookseller, so basically any technology that requires you to do more than that is difficult for me. So if you go to the Miro board, we are the big pink block down the bottom. So if I share my screen briefly so you can see where we are. So if I zoom all the way out. So this is the board that we use for all of the pivot activity. So you can see this one down the bottom here is the one that we're going to work on today. So I'll zoom in a bit here. So it says Listening Circle, Wednesday the 19th of June. We've got a little Doughnut Economics Action Lab logo there. So head down and left, and you should find yourself there. I'm going to stop sharing. Anyone struggling with Miro links and stuff? Because it can be a nightmare, can't it? So we're going to start with those, with picking up where Claire was getting to, and where Yanina was getting to with some suggestions for themes to discuss. So what we're going to do now, we're going to use those yellow post-it notes, bottom left of the pink box, just to put up themes. So one theme, Claire's theme, might be the confusing landscape of different initiatives and activities. So that could be a topic to discuss. So really it's, what do you want to discuss? Where do you see opportunities for regenerative business transformation? So we're going to spend 5 minutes just popping them in here. And then we will group them together, and then we'll bring our attention back into the Zoom room, and the people who propose them can talk about them, and people who want to comment can do. And that's what we're going to do for the most of the remaining hour. We're running a little late. If you need to take a break, feel free to do so, particularly now while we're moving stuff around on Zoom. But yeah, if you need an extra prompt for, well, what does he mean by themes? Well, imagine that the world woke up tomorrow and said, you know, the system's collapsing. How can we rebuild it? What would it mean to be regenerative? What would it mean to create structural change? What would be the themes that you would tell them to focus on? That's the sort of things that we're looking for. So yeah, take your post-it note. When you've done one, stick it in the middle over here.
Ah.
Looks like everyone's in the Miro board. If you're not able to use it, feel free to post suggestions for themes in the chat, and I'll stick them on. I'll do the old copy and paste. It looks like everyone's in there. we've run out of the first set of post-its, so I've added some more there. But I reckon we're getting to the sort of, let's start to try and group this together and see if it can make sense. I've been doing some of that as we've been going along, but feel, you know, it's a collective effort, so feel free to contribute. I do love whoever's put in bold that the economy will shrink to planetary limits by design or disaster. I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've done the maths, haven't we? Someone from Leeds did it, actually. Dan Hill from Leeds University did the math. Good life within planetary boundaries. And it is possible. You know, that was one of the first things that I found useful once I'd got the donut. I was like, well, this safe and just space, does it really exist? And it does exist, but we need to make our provisioning systems more efficient by a factor of about 6, I think his research said. I can add in a reference to that. So let's have a bit of a chat about what we've got. We seem to... Has anyone got any thoughts about the groupings? Is there anything someone is sort of inspired to pick up and have a conversation about? We'll get to most, well, some or all of these groupings. But has anyone got any thoughts about patterns you can see emerging from the things we're talking about? I certainly see there's quite a chunk in the middle about sort of the emotional journey and the business journey and the connections between the two there. There's certainly some stuff about communication, cross-pollinating with different groups. That comms piece is really important. It's a communications one as well, isn't it? There's a couple talking about business cases. And Erin, do you want to talk briefly about the case studies that Doughnut Economics are doing? Because I think that sort of covers that off, really, or is starting to cover it off in terms of demonstrating alternative ways.
Sure. And Vanessa's actually involved in that as well. That's at the moment. So and a few others have engaged at different points. But what we're trying to do is pull together very short stories of where, you know, and I'll use the term regenerative business as shorthand here, of regenerative businesses pursuing strategies or business models, i.e. revenue models and ways of operating and practicing, that are made possible because of the way the business is designed. So something in, for instance, the ownership model or the way that they've set up their relationship with investors has enabled them to invest in a particular way into a new product or into enabling a particular strategy with product design or in their supply chain or with their clients. So there's a whole host of them emerging from around the world. Everything from very deep-rooted examples, like for instance, Amul in India, which is co-owned by over 1 million smallholder dairy farmers. It's a business that's able to sort of really prioritize the smallholder farmers across India that are part of its business structure and its ownership model. From that sort of more, you know, ingrained model of co-ownership all the way to examples where, you know, things are happening within the board of a company, or things are happening within you know, the way the governance is structured in pockets of a company. So we're trying to sort of give a sense that you can unlock greater strategy if we also deliberately try to evolve the deep design of companies. And for those that are new to the term deep design, essentially we're talking about what Marjorie Kelly has created in terms of the framework of purpose, networks, governance, ownership, finance, and essentially being in service to social and ecological goals, not being in service to finance. And that sort of can flip what's possible for a company to do. So those will be a few pages, 2-3 pages long, that we'll publish from very different kinds of sectors, very different kinds of movements, ideas, identities, kind of business sort of communities that are out there. But deliberately trying to make the point that if we were to redesign companies in a very thoughtful way and pragmatic way, we can unlock a lot more, and unlock even mindset shifts, unlock cultural shifts, and unlock strategic shifts that are all urgent and need to happen yesterday.
Thanks, Orange. And I think this sort of leans into what Claire was saying, really, about we have got a confusing landscape. I wonder if we want to talk a bit more about that, because it was certainly something that I was really aware of when putting Piʌot out into the world, is that there is an absolute plethora of sustainability initiatives, regenerative initiatives, and so that was something that held back putting Piʌot out into the world. But I think that there's a couple of things where there's points of difference with Piʌot. One is that it isn't that divergent approach where we're going to teach everyone and let lots of flowers bloom. It's more that convergent approach, starting to bring together and say, well, where are the gaps? What can we do together? And so that's the other thing, I think, is that Piʌot isn't about being something in itself, I don't think. I think it's about putting wind in the sails of everyone trying to create regenerative change, whether that's businesses, employees, citizens. It's about being able to blow all those boats in the right direction. But Claire, did you want to contribute about that? And has anyone else got any other thoughts? Does anyone want to come in on that conversation? Just stick your hand up if you'd like to join that conversation or contribute to that conversation.
I'm going to be probably a little bit frank that we're in a room with people that understand more deeply about the shift that needs to happen and are well-read and well-educated around it. But talking to the everyday business person, sometimes they look at me like I'm cuckoo because they just don't understand the basics. And I think also we know where to go for information. We're able to research, we're motivated and interested in that. But when you're dealing with the day-to-day challenges of running a small business, it's really at the bottom of your list of priorities until legislation kicks in, or until your bank says, do you have a sustainability policy? Or until you're bidding for a tender and they say, you know, provide evidence of your social impact. So, you know, what we're talking about is really fantastic. But I want to try and find a way to make it really practical and simple for a small business to say, oh, there's a program and then there's support to embed it, and I can transition my business model to something that's regenerative, and somebody can show me how to do that, and there's evidence to say that it's going to make my business perform better. Yeah, I'll do it. That's kind of where I'm at with it.
Thanks, Claire. How does that land with others? Kyle, go on.
Yeah, no, I think I'm so glad you've raised that, because that's what I encounter in the conversations I have. I mean, actually, I don't know if I said the context, but I work at B Lab, so I help with the B Corp movement and stuff like that. So the conversation that we have, and actually that conversation I was having before was touching upon that. It's like, how do you make this as simple as possible, but not present it as a simple solution? So I think that's one of the things that we get challenged. Like, oh, can you just make the impact assessment simpler to become a B Corp? Like, that's not the point. The point is it's rigorous and it's hard, but the entry point and the starting point should be as easy as possible in recognition of that particular challenge. So I think it's definitely a tension point. The one thing, or the reason I should put my hand up was it was just interesting to see an example in Greater Manchester where they tried to bring the buses into public ownership, and one of the things that the mayor did there was to make it a requirement for businesses as part of the tendering process to join a good employment charter. And I thought it was a really good example of like where you got that push where something that's pretty good in Greater Manchester becomes something that's kind of part of the scoring criteria as well, which I thought was pretty good. And it's kind of example of like things like regulation at a more localized level rather than waiting for legislation en masse to pass as well. Lots of different ways into this.
Go on, I'm sure you can take it into. I'm not going to moderate. Just please feel free to contribute.
Okay, I'll just add if I can. I think you go like a little bit on the communication piece as well, but the part that I think it is a challenge in a way that people like, in the normal business are gonna try to be always measuring everything because everything is about numbers and data, and that's the idea that we would like to change. But the way to show, like when we talk about like a regenerative business, and I had someone like at the collective saying like, well, nobody's gonna wake up and say, I want to be regenerative today, because also like the way we name it, that's the kind of thing that I have in my mind these days. Like, how should we be talking about it? We're trying to do an event in a week that Enric is helping us to kind of promote, but we can see that people are not really engaging. And my question is about this is like, is it because when I say regenerative business, they're going to feel, oh, this is like for the sustainable brands, right? That's for Patagonia and, all of those natural. It's not for me. And so the question is it because this is systemic change and we all know this will take time to show, how are we able to start measuring, the small bits that, and so you can show the example, this company has done this and that's how they're progressing. Do you want to be part of that instead of calling yourself a regenerative? So I think, how do we bring this into the normal person life? And again, the internal part will be the same as I was speaking. I think we were talking on our group is, the journey, the inner journey of leadership. We here all understand, and we can talk about consciousness, but when we go into first, people who might think this is very spiritual, is not for me, is already like a put off. So how do we bring these ways of connecting back to nature in any way that they can feel it's normal, is walking in nature, is like growing your food? How do we bring those concepts into a very normal day-to-day person that is not haven't been involved on all this training, education, understanding, however you want to call. But yeah, I think it's translated into a very simple language.
I've got a couple of kind of ideas and thoughts based on what Claire and Flo have said. And I guess Claire's point is that almost when you get to the conversation, kind of there being a lack of comprehension, perhaps. And then obviously kind of Flo's challenge, which is getting to the conversation and there being an engagement problem, or like if you look at it in marketing terms, in terms of like conversion. So like there's a real challenge to even get people to that conversation. So I think, and I work for a hydrogen energy association, so that brings a whole like energy sector companies from startups, SMEs, to right all the way to like the biggest corporates working in the energy space. We have like a lot of like working groups and stuff, and we've got comms working group, and perhaps something would work well in terms of like a regenerative practitioners working group to kind of help to identify, okay, like what the priority opportunities of regenerative structural change, and then what are the main acceptance barriers to it, and then identifying like the key stakeholders to engage with, and then how best, for example, as a collective, we could engage with those. Like we might decide that it's more strategic to engage with, you know, commercial sustainability consultancies and try and be their regenerative practitioner. I'm sure people already do this already, but that kind of analysis done together could be a useful exercise.
Just keep going, guys. Just to add, if you can still see the Miro board, you'll see I'm taking notes on all your really useful comments and adding them into the bits using the green notes. If you want to make your own notes, you're welcome to. I'm just beavering away here whilst listening. Vanessa, did you want to come in? I know you've had your hand up for a while. Go.
Okay, yeah, so I have to say that I was really frustrated when I was working as a consultant in innovation projects, because we got a lot of money and in the end it was always about what direction the company wanted to take. Now I took the chance to work on my own, and I must say my perspective has become much more positive, and maybe that's also my naivety, but I always try to run and get inspired until I find that opportunity where I can also find some money, some grants, where I see that money will be invested. For example, now in the city here, we have a new program and they want to invest 10.5 million in new initiatives that are encouraging the city life. And I think if we have these opportunities, that's then really interesting to bring in these examples. For example, what the city of Amsterdam has been doing. And for that, there is in Vienna, the Library of Things. I think also there will be a case about that, possibly. And so I do see that things are happening and there's an opportunity. I do see that on the bright side, but I think sometimes when there's an opportunity, so much can be done. And I think sometimes then the resources are missing to, not only for me to submit one idea, because the city needs more. And I'm also in contact with them to work more strategically. But I would love for people to submit more of this local entrepreneurship ideas, or maybe to connect this opportunity more to others. And I'm not really sure how to do that yet.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Claire, in my own experience, I've been there trying to understand how to work with non-regenerative companies. And one of my conclusions is that you are not able to work with somebody that has not had this little sparkle of trying to do something in a different way. It's really impossible to try to change something or try to accompany or collaborate with someone who does not find anything wrong yet. So that's really, really difficult, and perhaps it's not our place there to be working with someone that, or some company that their only aim and focal point is to measure everything through the financial capital. We start working with at least the 5 capitals in different companies, but there must be some sparkle at the beginning from their point of view, from their side, not trying from our side to push the change, because it doesn't work at all.
Yeah, Nina,
So
can I
that's
respond to
our-
that? Yeah, I do totally agree. But actually, I work with a lot of social enterprises or tech for good organizations or businesses that do want to move in that direction, but the complexity is still difficult for them. So when you look at them struggling where they have the intention, what hope is there for businesses that will ultimately be forced to make that decision because of competitive advantage or risk?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting conversation that leans into that thing about you can't create change without changing yourself. And I love you, Nina's that sparkle. What a brilliant way of describing it, because it is like a sparkle, isn't it? And I don't see that. I could see an opportunity for Piʌot to demonstrate how you create more sparkles. I could definitely see that if you find a way to change the narrative and make that sparkle more accessible and engaging and not off-putting, because you know there's lots of great research on how our language just puts people off, businesses and consumers. Sorry, anyway, I chipped in. I'm going to shut up again. Kyle and Alistair have got their hands up.
Well, I'm going to defer to Alistair because I don't think he's spoken as much.
Oh, thanks, Carl. Yeah, I just had a couple of points actually. One was, I mean, it's about what are the roots in, really, isn't it? It's about how do you open up the door in the first place and get the sort of conversation going. So one thing I was really interested in, and it's a question really, I think probably to Erin, is I'm super interested because when I'm engaging with people, it's very clear to me that there's a huge amount of interest at sort of staff level and people interested in organizations who are really open to this and a kind of bottom-up approach. And I think, Erin, you've been exploring that, is that right? Or Deal has in general? And I'd be really interested in hearing about that because I think that it feels to me like a pincer movement from the top and the bottom could be potentially really powerful, because I think a huge selling point for any kind of regenerative approach is about staff welfare and staff morale, because basically most people's jobs are really miserable, actually. Most people really hate their work. We're probably quite lucky. Most of us probably don't hate our work, but we're quite privileged and unusual like that. And I think that's a really important part of this. And the other thing I wanted to build on was Vanessa's point, and I was thinking about this actually, funnily enough, Amelia, who was here earlier, I know her from years ago from activism. I've been involved in activism, and I was reflecting on this. Sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but my reflections on being involved in loads of different campaigns is you're not in control of the narrative, and you never know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And the most effective thing you can do is just be opportunistic in a lot of ways. And I feel like, you know, that's the situation here. We're on the margins of the overall narrative in reality of business. We don't control that. We don't know what's coming up, but we just got to be able to respond really effectively when circumstances change and issues change, where businesses are important. And for me, I'm wondering about, you know, you think about the overall sort of Doughnut regenerative model, and it's so big, which is wonderful, but actually it may be that it's just one little segment of it that pulls people in. Maybe they're interested in their carbon impact. Maybe they're interested in their community welfare program. Maybe they're interested in their employment packages. But if you could basically go in and say, oh yeah, we got a bit on that actually, funnily enough, we know about employment packages. This is what we've done with loads of other people. And then that kind of opens up the conversation to the bigger sort of the whole donut, not just a little section of it, you know. And that maybe those are the kinds of ways in to get people in, where you're offering real practical things about the fundamental problems they have right now. And I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, I'll go after Kyle.
You sure? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a word that Donella Meadows has used, like the dance, which I always find is really useful to have in this space. And I think it's kind of being able to sort of maneuver to the different arguments. Because I was thinking, like, if you want a sort of a realistic kind of like impression of like where this is landing, go and speak to a load of businesses in Lancashire about this, which I was doing the other day. And it was like, you know, there is probably a group of people that will characterize these kind of groups as kind of like a load of woo-woo tree huggers. You know, that's the kind of the way that's going to be perceived. Obviously, that's not my viewpoint, but it's like different people are going to come into different ways. And I think, you know, Claire, you were talking about this in the chat, and I think where I try and do is modify it. I can go into some space and just go like, the world is on fire. In other spaces, someone's going to say, what are the raw metrics here? What's the return on investment in doing this? And I think definitely sort of talking about like, well, surely you want to recruit and retain the best talent. You got Gen Z, you know, you talk about all these things and you maneuver the language accordingly. So I think it's being able to feel the beat and sort of respond to that. So that was something that I think there's this thing I wanted to respond to in the chat, which I think was quite interesting, was about the use of pictures. Now I think Vanessa was talking about this as well, which was talking about the other component of what Tim was saying at the start around the citizen side, and I can sort of see the book you've got in the background, Tim, with what John Alexander's doing, and I think there's a great community being built around citizenship, around that literature as well, which I'd invite to look at. What's quite interesting for me in terms of my exploration in this space is going beyond words and pictures to kind of like performance in a way. So I'll put some links in the chat, but I've been following the work of Katie Rubin, who's doing some stuff on legislative theatre, which is like combining theatre practice, looking at power, and getting people to actually act out these kind of instances of sort of power to actually develop policy proposals at a local level, which I think touches upon some of the place-based stuff that people put in the Miro board as well. So I think there's really interesting kind of imaginative practices that people can do to kind of engage with this work, which goes beyond just like writing loads of stuff down and being quite boring in a way. So I think that's something definitely worth looking into, because that might be a powerful way to engage citizens in the policy development in your local area, especially one that's sort of quite small, like yours, Vince. So, yeah, I'll pass to Orange.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, I mean, I responding a bit to Alistair's point about sort of the bottom up bit meeting the top down part. I think people have rightly sometimes critiqued our work at Deal as being, well, you're opening up conversations for which only a handful of people have agency to change this. Like, how many people really feel like they can talk about who's represented on the board, or what the financial parameters are, or what's in the term sheet with investors, or what the ownership model evolves into? Like, it might be even above the C-suite level, you know, in terms of, you know, the current owners of a business can push some of these conversations, which isn't quite right, because there are lots of ways we've seen companies evolve, but at the same time there needs to be more work to pull that together. So I saw Liv posted or mentioned in the comment the work we did recently with Undercover Activist, and it felt like and that's an organization led by Tessa Winnick, who's amazing. She's one of the co-founders of Fairphone as well, and if you ever get to meet her in person, she can give you much more deeper background story for Fairphone, what could have been, you know, if they thought about enterprise design more deliberately from the beginning, a lot more might have been possible. You know, that with even businesses we celebrate sometimes have room for improvement in unlocking the kind of ambition they could have otherwise pursued with different kinds of enterprise design. But what we landed on was that a lot of the employee activism that her and her community are pushing on is usually around specific practices or about specific kind of initiatives or targets they might set, usually around climate. And there's really creative ways employees are coming together, including across companies as well, to like share resources and playbooks and ways to kind of build momentum internally and apply force internally to the urgency of this. But the thing that I think where we landed was that alongside those practice changes, there could also be employee activism to support an evolution of the design of the company, so that the future generations of employees have got more open doors, more ways to be able to drive some of this change. And some of this is also coming through, you know, innovations. Like I think ABN AMRO has got like a future generations board. Other companies are beginning to like look at ways that employees can more effectively make those voices heard. Two more quick points on that. One is, like, I learned a lot in one of the workshops we did where we paired up C-suite individuals with people who would not normally have access to anyone from the C-suite, and ran through the Doughnut design business tool with them and got the, and what was really interesting was, you know, I think it was a CFO that was there, and then someone from the R&D team of like a major pharmaceuticals company, and the person from the R&D team had these amazing ideas that would never reach the C-suite because of the financial parameters that were necessary to make the business case. And the CFO was appalled by the outcome of the financial parameters and how much it was limiting these sorts of ideas from even emerging because of the design of the business that was enforcing very strict financial criteria on ROI or margin expectations. And that can be a really interesting way to break barriers and also encourage people to redesign internally, to go, okay, how do we bring flexibility into some of our internal rules to allow these things to emerge? And the last point is there's increasing interest among the union movement across Europe on some of this, including some of the most like left-wing French unions who have traditionally been against being involved in even corporate governance, and they've seen corporate governance as, well, that's what the capitalists do, and we negotiate for a better deal for workers. We don't get involved in management. And lots of unions actually in the past have sometimes rallied against like worker representation on boards as being a corruption of you know, the purity of what the union movement's trying to do. And that's changing, and there's an increasing sort of appetite for what they call democratic business or democratization of the workplace among different bits of the union movement across Europe and beyond at the moment. And I think that's coming together with the undercover activist style employee activism work, and with some of the enterprise design stuff that's also that we and others are trying to also push forward on. So there's something that's beginning to emerge, and I think what policymakers in Brussels that I speak to sometimes about this are realizing that, you know, worker participation in the ecological transition of companies is going to be critical to avoid the backlash that people will get from, you know, whether it's elements of the union movement that have sometimes went against climate action, seeing it as a threat to jobs, for instance. Well, if you democratize elements of governance to have employee voice in there, then suddenly that transition is shaped more actively by people who might feel threatened by change of industries, change of corporations. So I feel like something's emerging there, that where employee engagement is going to be a bigger part of these transitional journeys.
And just quickly to say, I did have a chat with Tessa after the Doughnut workshop and talked about Piʌot. She was hoping to join us today, but there's been a lot of conversation around that bottom-up change, engaging with business staff. So it feels like there might be merit in expanding that discussion into a shared conversation with the undercover activist. And I think Tessa would probably be very up for that. I mean, that's the point of this, is that we're starting these conversations, and the next thing is where do we take them? Sorry, I'll shut up again, Liv.
I just wanted to go back to what Claire was saying about you know, how you prioritize these conversations when well, she used the small business example when they've got so many other things that are a priority, and it made me think of well, I'm, as I mentioned, working in the hydrogen space, so that's very much like a, you know, a low carbon technology that's trying to disrupt, you know, the traditional energy sector. And I run like quite a few conferences in relation to that. And if I think about like how I would get, you know, the regenerative structural change kind of business transformation kind of conversation onto that like conference like spreadsheet, when what they talk about is supply chains, skills, you know, investment, public and private. They talk about scaling up supply, building demand, you know, this that within that decarbonisation, you know, green growth space, you know, the change that they're trying to implement is also like is large, and it's also complicated. So it's how to kind of like, I don't know whether we would want to latch onto those conversations, but it's like, how would I get these types of conversations into an already complex picture that people are, you know, or grappling with all these elements, if that makes sense. Maybe I don't know whether someone could share, because I know the Doughnut Economics have an open door policy. Maybe like the logic behind that, because I guess there's different approaches. There's probably open door, and then there's perhaps the closed door. I don't know whether people have more experience with the closed door, but kind of what's the logic behind the open door, and how do you like interact with perhaps organizations that do the opposite or different things to kind of like complement?
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of respond on behalf of Deal, so we're a very, very tiny team. Our entire team that works on business and all the sectors and all the markets and jurisdictions is present in this call. It's me. So I work on everything everywhere all at once, which means that we've had to sort of pick a very particular kind of strategy, which is like, let's focus on enterprise design, because it feels like that will be helpful for everything else others are doing as well. If you're working on making the business case or having enlightened leadership or regulatory change to support, you know, or you know, better impact measurement and goal setting, also changing the design of companies will make those other strategies more effective. You'll have, you know, designs of companies that are leaning into the regulations rather than lobbying against. You'll have designs of companies that are opening doors and supporting enlightened leaders and cultural change, etc. And the impacts and the targets become more meaningful and respond with action, etc. So that was the assumption we make. I think that still stands. That still makes sense to me. And we then try to just create the tools so to get other people, enable other people to use Doughnut Economics if it's useful, if this approach is helpful for their context. And in some it's not, in some it is. Some places it opens new doors. And you know, I've been running for 3 years straight, like a session at the British Retail Consortium. In fact, Kyle, I think I met you there through 2.5 years ago at the first one I did, and I've been sort of going back and running these sessions. It's been interesting to see there how it responds to others who are turning up in that space and talking to the business leaders from the retail sector. And what I've actually found is, you know, a slightly related and slightly more personal discovery is that for the first 2 years, I was sort of there doing the sell job to, you know, explain why we need to redesign companies and how it's possible and how some have already done it, and look at the great things it can accomplish for you to be future fit as a company, etc. And this year I sort of threw my hands up a bit more. I was like, I'm not sure it's going to be possible for all of you to do it. I'm not even sure how you might do it. Here are some things, loads of things I don't know, like, and it works so much better. I don't know, like to sort of say, to acknowledge how little I know felt more credible than spending all the energy trying to showcase how much I know, which isn't that much, you know, in the scheme of things. So anyway, a little personal reflection on that front as well.
Thanks, Orange. There's 2 yellow post-it notes I just wanted to talk about briefly, which are quite distinct to lots of the other ones, and they're down in the bottom right-hand corner. So one of them says, deeper commercial collaboration by regenerative businesses. Just to say, I am going to get us finished for past. And the other one says, lower cost of capital for businesses that don't prioritize capital. And they seem quite like structural comments that are very rooted in our understanding of the way that businesses and markets work. So I just wondered if anyone wanted to talk about those. I picked up one of the comments that I think Liv was making about in-sector conversations about, well, what are the opportunities? And it does strike me that there's a sector thing about joining businesses together rather than tackling businesses individually, which might be an opportunity. Does anyone want to talk to either of those two?
Maybe if I can say one sentence, like, because I put the capital one in the cost of capital one in, Tim, only because I just want to out a contradiction here, that when you design for regenerative outcomes and you prioritize ecological and social outcomes, it can often mean you're not designing to optimize for return to financial capital, and you might need to design the power relationship differently with investment. And this, you know, the natural response of the financial system is to say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to be a bit more suspicious of this sort of business. I'm going to see it as a high risk, and I'm going to see it as potentially lower reward. But what would it take for us to create the opportunity to flip that and say, you know, I don't have an answer for this, but it's, when I pull on this string, I end up often at that level. And for some businesses, they don't need a huge amount of financial capital to work. They don't need a new investment, you know, round to get to become viable or thrive. And that's great. Some can bootstrap, etc. But in some sectors, they need 500 million investment to make the operations work. And in that process, they get drawn away from the initial ideas and mission that led to them being set up. So and especially a lot of us are connected to the UK, you know, a new government is likely. What would be some of the bigger ideas for going, how does a financial system evolve to work in favor and in service of the kind of outcomes we're talking about, rather than life itself being in service of finance itself? So yeah, that's the contradiction I was trying to frame as an opportunity.
Me, like the deeper commercial collaboration by regenerative businesses is really interesting. I like to think in business cases, as next week I will speak to companies in the electronics industry. And so what are the cases there? What can we learn? But if we would start from scratch, how would the perfect answer to this look like? What are like the options? What are scenarios within this space to then actually go back and discuss what would work for you? What would work for you? And I sometimes think the terminology is so hard because some businesses have taken one step. Like I've been researching a bit about Ecosia, and they are using all their profits to plant trees, which of course is amazing and it's a great story. But Andrew actually asked me, so what about the product features? Like if we go a bit deeper, how is that affecting the company? When I asked, I couldn't reach anyone, which was a pity, although I had a contact there. And I couldn't find something. I did a lot of research. And I think this is where some companies take only a tiny step, and it can be so much more. And there we have like the future scenarios, like this regenerative business company ideas, and the companies that have taken the step. It's hard to communicate. We never want to criticize, but the opportunities are so much bigger. Yeah, that's something I find really interesting.
That's interesting. Could I just add on that? I think that's very interesting with Ecosia, because effectively Ecosia is, as a search engine, is Bing, Microsoft's Bing, and Microsoft has just announced that it's got 30% more carbon emissions as a result of its AI infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what it is. It's just a tiny little veneer over the top of the Bing search engine. So, and that's the fundamental issue. I just wanted, this is the fundamental question, isn't it, though, about capital that you raised there. I mean, ultimately, companies, if you borrow money, you have to pay it back on interest. You need to grow to actually pay the money back. I mean, is this not the fundamental issue with any kind of alternative business model around regenerative economics? How do you square that particular circle?
I really don't know. I think it ends up opening questions about what does a financial system need to look like? And then you end up in really esoteric questions of what is money anyway, you know, and who issues and what power does it have and what rights do you have when you buy something, and are you really an owner when you buy a share? And like, you end up at these levels of questions that I know enough about to know that I don't know enough about. And there's not a lot of people in the financial system that are thinking at that level. I think there's a lot of the assumptions of the current system that remain.
Yeah.
Kyle offered to speak about sectors. We've got 2 minutes left. We'll have to leave it for another time. Thank you for offering, Kyle. I'm so grateful to you all. It's been a wonderful, wonderful listening circle. I knew it would be, because, you know, this is the deal community. If ever we could have the perfect listening circle about this, it was going to be us, wasn't it? So thank you. It was absolutely fabulous. I don't know where we're going with this. Genuinely, you might see something in this. Actually, this is something we could take up. Well, that's how it works. So I'm sure this will go round and round. This will metabolize. Things might pop out. Who knows? I think it's quite likely that we'll pick up that conversation about activism with undercover activists. I think that seems a key opportunity. And then the rest of this, well, we're going to start to feed it into some sense-making sessions that we hold through the Piʌot circle. So we've run 3 listening circles now. You can see them on the Miro board. So now it's probably time to start to bring it back together and go, right, well, which direction is this pointing to? Who should we be having more conversations with in that same way that we just talked about with the undercover activist? We are going to be doing some stuff throughout the rest of the year. I mentioned it briefly in the chat. So we've just got some funding from the Collective Imagination Practice community to set up it's called Forking Beautiful Futures. This idea of bringing to life the futures that we don't take, like, you know, a conservation corps instead of a national service. What would that look like? So we're going to be doing some of that. So there's lots happening within Piʌot. Please, if you're not already signed up for our emails, do sign up at wepivyot.today. Do share it with other people. Do make suggestions for where we might want to take this. It's all out there. It's emergent. I very much want to let go and make lots of space for other people to come in and shape this, because, you know, we don't get where we need to get to by doing the things that we used to do, or following the path that's already laid out for us. We need to relay that path ourselves. So thank you so much. That's it. We're done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. It's been a brilliant session. Lovely to meet you all as well.
Thank you.
Great to see you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.